My mom's boyfriend demanded that I hand over my money or he'd ruin my life. I got him arrested and dumped. When I was 13, my dad left my mom for his coworker, Diane, and it blew our family apart. My mom spent an entire year crying on the couch, telling me things no kid should ever have to hear about their parents' marriage. Stuff that made me feel sick. She kept saying nobody would ever love her again, and somehow I became her therapist while I was still trying to process the divorce myself. My grandma finally stepped in when I turned 15 and forced my mom to get real help. The meds helped, but she still spiraled anytime my dad or my stepmom came up, or whenever we had to visit my dad and my half-brother. She never fully healed, she just learned to function. Then about a year ago, she met a guy named Todd at her book club, and suddenly she was acting like a teenager with her first boyfriend. He was posting online about how amazing she was, buying her jewelry, doing all the love-bombing stuff. At first, I was genuinely happy for her. I wanted her to be okay. But Todd started coming over more and more until he was basically living with us several days a week. And that's when the mask came off. He started acting like the house belonged to him and we were just guests he tolerated. If I wore normal summer clothes like shorts and a tank top, he'd tell me I looked like I was trying to get attention and would make me change. It made my skin crawl, because why was he even looking at me like that? He was worse with my little brother, Ryan. Every day it was shut your mouth, stop being annoying, you're stupid. If Ryan forgot homework or left his backpack by the door, Todd would insult him like a grown man bullying a kid. One time Ryan was just talking about his day at school and Todd grabbed his shoulder hard and told him nobody cared about his dumb stories. Ryan cried, and my mom told him to stop being so sensitive, that Todd was just trying to help. She took Todd's side every single time. 3 weeks ago, I came home from my job late, around 10 at night. Todd was on the couch drunk. He asked to borrow money. I said no, because why would I hand my money to my mom's boyfriend? He exploded. He started screaming that I was a selfish brat and he'd make my life hell if I didn't give him cash. Then he snatched my water glass out of my hand and hurled it at the wall so hard it shattered everywhere. My mom got angry about the broken glass, not about him threatening me. She pulled money from her purse and gave it to him. And then she made me apologize to him for being disrespectful. She said I needed to learn to respect the man of the house. Todd stood there smirking while I said sorry for not giving him my own money. That night I called my dad crying. He was furious and told me I could move in with him immediately. But I couldn't leave Ryan alone with Todd. My dad asked one question that stuck in my head. Does that guy even have a job? Because nobody knew what Todd did. He was always home when we got back from school. He never talked about work. He'd mention meetings or deals, but never details. He drove a nice truck, wore expensive clothes, and somehow still kept asking my mom for money for gas and groceries. He always said his money was tied up in investments. So I started paying attention. I checked his social media and discovered he had an ex-wife and 2 kids he'd never mentioned. I found his ex-wife's profile, her name was Brianna, and I messaged her. She told me everything. Todd hadn't had a real job in 3 years. He targeted single moms with money, moved in, lived off them until they caught on, then jumped to the next woman. Brianna said he still owed her $12,000 in child support and had done this to at least 4 other women she knew about. He kept changing phone numbers and moving so she couldn't track him down. She told me he was a professional at making desperate women feel special at first, then slowly taking control of their money and their kids. I gave her our address. But I needed Todd away from my family before anything else happened. So I played a role I hated playing. I told my mom I wanted to apologize properly to Todd. I told her I wanted to cook his favorite dinner on Friday night. My mom was thrilled. She acted like this meant we were finally becoming a real family. That Friday, I made a huge meal and acted sweet. I kept refilling Todd's beer and kept telling him I was sorry for being difficult. He got comfortable. He drank more and more, and by the time it was late, he was wasted. That's when he got careless. He started bragging about how he had my mom wrapped around his finger. He said soon he'd get her to add him to the house deed. He said once his name was on the house, he'd have real security. My mom looked confused and asked what he meant. Todd laughed and said she was so desperate for love she'd give him anything. He called her pathetic. Right to her face. He said dating lonely single moms was like taking candy from babies. And then the doorbell rang. I walked to the door and opened it. Brianna stood there holding a thick folder. Next to her was a police officer in uniform. Brianna's eyes locked on Todd in the living room and her whole body went stiff. She pointed at him and said, loud and clear, "That's him." Todd's face went white. He tried to stand, but he wobbled like he might collapse. The officer stepped in and told everyone to stay calm. He told Todd to sit back down. My mom demanded to know what was going on. Brianna walked into the room and introduced herself. She said she'd been looking for Todd for 8 months. The officer explained he was from family court enforcement and they needed to discuss $12,000 in unpaid child support. Ryan came out of his room and stood in the hallway watching. Todd's hands were shaking. My mom kept looking at him, waiting for him to explain, like she could still force this to make sense. Brianna opened her folder, held up a photo of 2 little girls, and said those were Todd's daughters. My mom stared at the picture, then at Todd, and asked him if it was true. He couldn't even speak. He just nodded. That tiny nod shattered something in my mom. She made this sound that was half gasp, half sob. She kept asking how. How could he lie about something like that? Todd tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. He reached for my mom's hand, and she yanked away like he was poison. Brianna laughed, not because it was funny, but because she'd heard the same lies before. She said Todd told every woman the same story. The officer said there were warrants for Todd's arrest in 2 counties, and listed charges connected to child support evasion and fraud. Then the officer pulled out handcuffs. My mom started crying harder, asking if this was really necessary. The officer said yes. Todd had outstanding warrants. He had to be taken in. Todd stood up slowly, put his hands behind his back, and as the cuffs clicked, he looked at my mom and said he loved her. He said Brianna was crazy. He begged my mom to bail him out so they could work through it. Brianna laughed again and told my mom she was the 5th woman Todd had done this to. They walked him out. When the door shut behind them, the house went silent except for my mom crying. Ryan asked if Todd was coming back. I told him no. That Todd was gone. The next morning, my mom stayed in bed with the covers pulled over her head. She wouldn't talk. I got Ryan ready for school, made him breakfast, packed his backpack, and walked him to the bus stop like I was the adult in the house. When I came back, my mom still wouldn't open her door. I called my dad and told him everything. He said he'd come pick us up right away and we could stay with him. I started packing. Then my mom came out, panicked. She begged me not to take Ryan. She kept saying she couldn't lose her kids too. I felt stuck between protecting my brother and not completely destroying my mom when she was already falling apart. So I gave her one condition. Ryan and I would stay, if she called my grandma right then and asked for help. My mom nodded and called her. When Grandma heard what happened, she said she'd be there that afternoon. When Grandma arrived, she didn't comfort my mom. She confronted her. She told her this was the 2nd time in a few years my mom had put a man ahead of her kids. First, she had dumped her divorce trauma on me when I was just a child. Now she'd let Todd bully Ryan and me because she was terrified of being alone. Grandma said meds and occasional therapy weren't enough if my mom never dealt with her fear of abandonment. She told my mom she needed real help, intensive help, or she was going to lose her children. For the first time, I felt relief. Because someone else was finally saying the things I'd been carrying alone. 2 days later, Brianna called me. She said Todd was still in jail on the child support warrants, and now there were additional charges being filed for fraud and identity theft. More women had come forward with similar stories. Brianna thanked me, because her daughters would finally get support they deserved. I thought it was over. Then a week later, the bank called my mom to confirm a large withdrawal. $8,000. I asked her why she needed that much cash, and she broke down and admitted it was for Todd's bail. I just stared at her. After everything, the threats, the abuse, the lies, the warrants, she was still trying to save him. She kept saying everyone deserved a second chance. She said I didn't understand how complicated adult relationships were. I told her I understood perfectly, she was choosing a con artist over her own kids. That night we fought, and Ryan heard it. He started crying. He asked if Todd was coming back. I promised him Todd wouldn't come back even if I had to move us both to my dad's house. After Ryan fell asleep, I called my grandma crying and told her about the bail money. She said she'd be there first thing in the morning. Grandma walked in at 8 a.m. like a storm. She sat across from my mom and told her something that finally made her face go white. If my mom contacted Todd again or helped him in any way, Grandma would file for emergency custody of Ryan. No more warnings. No more excuses. Grandma told my mom this was rock bottom. Either she chose her children and got serious help, or she was going to lose them. She put a therapist's card on the table and told my mom she would go multiple times a week and attend a support group. My mom tried to argue, but Grandma shut it down. She said clearly what my mom had been doing wasn't working, because she was still trying to bail out a criminal who used her. My mom finally agreed and scheduled the first appointment while Grandma waited. After that, things didn't magically fix themselves. My mom was still broken in a lot of ways. Ryan still had nightmares. I was still angry and exhausted. But slowly, things started shifting. My mom started actually showing up to therapy. She started going to group meetings. Grandma checked in constantly to make sure she didn't quit when it got uncomfortable. I went to the school counselor and finally said out loud that I was tired of being the one who had to fix everything. I cried harder than I ever had in front of another adult. Ryan started seeing a child therapist too. That part hurt the most, realizing he'd been hurt deeper than he ever showed. One day he admitted that when Todd lived with us, he used to hide in his closet whenever Todd was home because he was scared of getting yelled at. Hearing that made my stomach drop. I thought I'd been protecting him, but he'd been living in fear right under my nose. We went to family court and got a restraining order for all of us. The prosecutor laid out Todd's pattern: vulnerable women, love bombing, moving in, controlling money, controlling kids. The judge granted a 2-year protective order. Watching my mom say yes to it in that tiny voice was the first time I believed she might actually be done. A couple months into therapy, my mom asked to talk. She told me her therapist made her realize how wrong it was that she turned me into her emotional dumping ground during the divorce. She admitted she ignored every red flag with Todd because she was terrified of being alone. It wasn't dramatic or perfect, but it was the first time she took responsibility without blaming me or collapsing into self-pity. I told her I had rules. I wasn't her therapist anymore. I wasn't responsible for fixing her relationships or keeping her stable. She had to handle her own emotions with her therapist, her support group, and Grandma. She agreed. We started having family meetings on Sunday nights. At first it felt awkward and forced. Then Ryan started opening up. He talked about how scared he'd been. Mom cried and told him it was never his fault. That Todd was the problem, not Ryan. It was messy. It was hard. It was slow. But it was real. Months later, my mom came home from the grocery store and told me something small, but it mattered. A man had asked for her number, and she said no. She said a year ago she would have jumped at it. But now she was focusing on herself for at least a year, like her therapist told her to. She asked if I was proud. I told her I was. Not because I trusted everything yet. But because for the first time in a long time, she was choosing us.